Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
The ResourceWorks Society is holding an event tomorrow about LNG. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, one of the things we like to do at ResourceWorks is take an economic lens and place it on some of the issues around us. We've done that with different things in forestry, mining, oil and gas before. Now, we've asked our economist, Philip Cross, who's an eminent Ottawa-based economist who for many years ran the economic analysis section of Statistics Canada. We've also been in the news for different reasons. We've asked Mr. Cross to come out and tell us what impact on the British Columbia economy we can expect to see from LNG, liquefied natural gas, because there is a now $40 billion project, LNG Canada, that's going to be moving forward.
And what kind of impacts do you think he's going to tell you about?
Well, I've seen the study, and it's going to be released on Wednesday, the 14th of November. It'll be at the ResourceWorks website, and we can see it as of Wednesday. And what he's talking about is the three main components of activity to bring that project about. First of all, you've got where the gas comes from. In the industry of oil and gas and LNG, they call that upstream. And then there's the pipeline that has to be built, a new pipeline to get it to the coast, all this natural gas. They call that the midstream. And then he's looking as best he can at the so-called downstream, which is where the LNG terminal is going to go so they can load the LNG into ships so it can get to market. So upstream, midstream, downstream. He's put some numbers onto these different things. We found out one interesting thing, which is that because Canada has never had a purpose-built export terminal for LNG built on its shores in our history, we actually don't have a very good model yet to understand the economic impact of that. So it's going to be a little bit of a gray area for the computational models that Statistics Canada uses. So it'll take a little longer to get at that from, his approach, from Phil Cross's approach. But in the meantime, what we do know is that a lot of the economic impact depends on what the price is that the LNG fetches in its markets, whether that's China, Japan, Malaysia, Korea, where it's going to be going. We can't predict that with certainty, but the risk that's been accepted by the project is obviously such that they think they can make a profit on this.
Well, what about places like Australia or Louisiana where they do have terminals like that? Surely you have benefits too, not just from shipping the LNG, but you're going to have to build houses for the workers. They need stores. You need to repair those ships when they pull into harbor. Those are the kinds of things that you'll be looking at, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think if you consider just to build the LNG terminal, there's the benefits there. Also, operating the terminal over the many decades to come when it's operational. Recently, I was in Kitimat. I saw for myself the place where they're going to put the temporary town, if you will, where the workers who are building the terminal, putting it together, are going to be staying. I talked to a lot of the local businesses. They are so excited, whether it's a positive or negative. The local real estate market has really changed since the announcement came in early October. When I was there in the summer, it was kind of flat. People weren't sure where it was going to go. And there were houses for sale. But now you cannot buy a house in Kitimat. They're very hard to get. And if you can, the price has gone up considerably. That's just a natural thing. It is obviously problematic for anyone who has suddenly got a job or a reason to be in Kitimat and needs a place to stay. Terrace isn't very far away. They've got a good housing stock there. There's new hotels that have been built. So a lot of dynamic things going on. But one thing that Mr. Cross found is that after just the activity of building the natural gas extraction and the pipeline, I mean, that's all very significant. You've got these other things that happen. The thing that is most benefited by a project like this Number two is manufacturing, all the things that have to be made, from the chassis for a truck to the components of a pipeline. That is something that runs through just about every province in Confederation. He has measured the impact of resource sector growth, which includes LNG. When we see investments, the story in BC is sometimes a little bit up and down, but on the broader story, we are seeing that the resource industries are actually becoming slightly more important in some measures. In other measures, they are falling back in competitiveness just because of the fact that housing is drawing so much of the investment in our province. It almost overshadows natural resources. Well, in certain ways, it's bigger, but in other ways, in terms of the jobs generated, it generates very good employment. After manufacturing, you have a lot of employment in what Mr. Cross calls the FIRE sector. That's finance, insurance, and real estate. F-I-R-E, FIRE. And we'll be talking about that on the afternoon of the 14th.
Where is this conference and when does it start?
Well, there's still the possibility of last-minute tickets for anyone who is hearing this before 12 noon on the 14th of November. If you come down to the Fairmont Pacific Rim in downtown Vancouver at 11:30, that's when the lunch starts. It's not only Philip Cross. We have a panel of eminent economists and thinkers who will be joining us, and we'll hear their perspectives as well. I think it's going to be a very good event. We're also hearing from an advocate of electric vehicles who sees LNG as having a role in expediting his goals. So, there's a lot of considerations that if you want to have a expansive view of what LNG means, you could be considering. Because, of course, there's the whole issue of climate change and the fact that LNG is coveted in foreign markets because it is a lower carbon form of reliable fuel that people need and want. And in countries like China, we're now finding in 2018, it wasn't this way before, but it is now the case that they're building more new electricity generation from solar and wind, from renewables, than from other sources, even though they're still building a whole lot of coal. That's true too. But in order to have renewables in your energy mix, you need to have backup for when the sun is not shining or the wind isn't blowing. And natural gas is probably the most desirable and cheapest and most sought after solution for that. So if you have a natural gas plant, you can just switch it on with a flip of the switch. You can't do that with coal. They always have to stay on. So it's a beautiful solution for countries that are going through this sort of energy transition. We tend to overlook that.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, after 10 years of carbon taxes, BC must have the lowest gasoline consumption rate in North America, you would think.
Well, yes, you think that consumers would have adopted their behavior. They would have taken the cue from government with these rising carbon taxes and just stopped driving. That would be what you'd expect, right, Jim?
Well, I think that's what they wanted us to do, is ride our bicycles from Chilliwack to Vancouver to work every day.
That's pretty much it. I mean, I remember back in 2008, and you were on the scene at that time too, when they brought in the carbon dioxide emissions tax, February 2008. I was driving around. I noticed that there were lineups that night at the gas stations. People were filling up because there was a new tax coming on, the carbon tax. Some people obviously dreaded it because they wanted to fill up the cars just case when this apocalyptic event occurred, they would have a full tank of gas. Well, it was 2.5 cents a liter initially, and the world didn't end the next day. People were able to get gas. It wasn't that big a crisis. And, what's interesting is what happened after that, because I think the expectation was that consumers would, rather than just simply taking the hit of another tax, they would adjust their behavior. Because the thing that the BC government used to say back in those days, I remember them, they were always calling me to say this, we want to reward the behaviors that we desire more of, and we want to punish the behaviors that we want less of. And driving and burning gas, diesel, they wanted less of that. So they put a tax on it, stamp it out. Well, how has it turned out? We now have the benefit of being able to look back on 10 years of experience, 2008 to 2018. And it's a very good moment to do this because Canada is about to implement, whether imposed by Ottawa or voluntarily by the provinces and territories, methods of pricing carbon, mostly in the form of carbon taxes. And that's something that, as we've talked about, is creating a lot of controversy because quite a few provinces are saying, well, we don't think a carbon tax is a good idea. We're not going to cooperate with you, Mr. Prime Minister. So this is where we stand as 2018 comes to a close. And what I would say is let's look back at the BC experience and see what we can learn from it.
And what have we learned so far?
Okay, well, I went back. I just like to ask basic questions. And maybe it's simplistic, but it's always served me well in the field of journalism to get in there and, if necessary, call a spade a spade. I mean, let's ask the question. Having a carbon tax, did it cause us to use less gas and diesel, or didn't it? And if you ask that question, the answer you come up with is it didn't make any difference at all. We use just as much gasoline and diesel now as we did in 2008 per capita.
Well, if it's not meeting its goal, is the government going to increase that tax, or is there any hope that it'll decrease it? And what about our competitiveness with neighboring places like Alberta and Washington State, where they're anti-carbon tax?
Well, that's interesting because in the midterm elections in the U.S., one of the things on the local ballot in Washington State was a carbon tax, and voters voted, I think it was 60%, pretty strong margin against it. A lot of people down there came out blaming big oil for spending a lot of money, but don't forget that people like Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire, and the founder of Microsoft, who lives down in Seattle, whose name escapes me, you know who I'm talking about, they put a lot of money into the yes, let's have a carbon tax side, so it's kind of balanced out, I would think, by big money versus big money. In any event, the people rejected it. They're not going to have that anytime soon down there. I think if you look at what actually happened in D.C., though, it gets more interesting, more into the details you get. And I think the carbon tax came along at a time when automobiles were subject to a whole bunch of innovations. Their engines were getting smaller, but equally powerful or equally able to convey the cars around that they were supposed to power. There were a lot of things through lighter bodies and other technologies that just improved the performance of cars. Now, back in 2007, the most popular car in Canada was a Honda Civic. 10 years later, we've seen this trend in BC where everyone now wants to drive an SUV or pickup truck. You know, in 2018, the most popular car is the Ford 150 pickup truck. So we've gone from these small little gas sippers to these bigger cars. And here's what's happened is that consumers, for whatever reason, and I think we should try to understand the psychology a little better, have realized that the bigger cars of today use about the same fuel as the smaller cars of yesterday. So I think a lot of people just figure, you know what? I'm going to get myself an upgraded vehicle. I'm going to pay the same amount, basically, you know, rounded off a few bucks or a few cents as I used to for fuel, but I'm going to have a bigger ride. And I'm going to be able to maybe have better protection for the children I'm taking to school in this car, so I feel good about that. It doesn't really cost me too much more of the payment, so what the heck? I think that's what happens. So rather than reduce the amount, they just simply put the gains of technology into their pockets, as it were, and benefited from it personally.
Stewart, another thing too that they didn't do was take the carbon tax and use that revenue to improve public transit so people wouldn't have to use their car. And what about the transit driver who has to take his own vehicle to work because there is no transit overnight?
Well, there are so many pitfalls in this. I mean, there is the demand that these taxes be revenue neutral, that instead of it being just a one-way grab.
But how about dedicating them to measures that will actually help people get out of their private vehicles and onto public transit? Well, a lot of the Lower Mainland has no public transit, or if it does, it runs so infrequently, it's practically useless.
Well, yeah, and that's a tough sell in rural areas where they don't have bus service and don't expect they will ever have a SkyTrain serving them in, rural Kamloops. So those people would feel unfairly put upon if they had to pay taxes that were just going to help people in the city. I mean, there's a lot of political pressures for those making these decisions, and I don't envy them, but I mean, it's not simple. And is there a simple fix? I don't know, but right now there is a kind of cult of expertise of these carbon experts who all have their models, and they come out of the universities to mix with us common folk and tell us that they've got it figured out, and don't worry, and don't you go telling us that carbon taxes aren't effective because you're ignoring our models. Well, I've looked at those models and I've compared them to the real world, and the observations I've made I think are far more significant because it's what actually happened. It's not my prediction of my theory of what might happen in the future if all my conditions are present. And so I think this is a real danger because, and here's why it's a very consequential thing, is that if we're putting all our hopes on carbon taxes to deal with a problem that's real, climate change, that we want to have a real impact on, and we should, then I would say, based on BC's experience, that carbon taxes are not going to be the thing that delivers that to us. We need to be looking at things that will be effective, and some of those things are being looked at. We don't hear much about them, but I think the others are being ignored. We need to look at more innovation in oil and gas, greater efficiency. The biggest gains can be made in stopping the wastage and loss of energy in the systems and things that we do.
Well, the Olympic Village might be a good example of that. So much of the heat we generate in our homes is washing dishes and clothes, and then that heat is literally flushed down the sewer line, and so they have a way to recapture some of the heat energy and put it back into the buildings. There's a way with innovation, and no tax money was involved.
Yeah, that's a good one. And any new building that we're seeing because of the new building codes are far, far more fuel efficient than...
Why isn't it mandatory to have solar panels in all new buildings? It is in California.
Well, I think down there they have more sunshine. They have a better...
But why waste the bit of good sunshine we have every summer?
Indeed. And, well, there's issues with storing all that power and so on, but I think over time we will see more adaptation of that. But what we tend to be focusing on is the marginal gains, little things that we feel good about because people think they're cool, and we're ignoring the really big things like innovation in the internal combustion engine. Now, you're not supposed to talk about cars and gas burning cars. That's supposed to be bad. It's off limits now. You can only talk about hydrogen vehicles or electric cars. That's good. Well, the reality is over 98% or 99% of the cars we actually have on the road right now, and the gas station fuel distribution systems are kind of old-fashioned, and we could complain about that and want to change it, and let's bring on that change, but it's going to take a long time. So while we're doing all these things, we should be doing the things that aren't quite as sexy as those cutting-edge, marvelous things that lots of people dream about.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of Powerband Solutions. Powerband is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. Powerband Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, you're concerned about U.S.-funded groups that are against job creation in Canada, and could this be a secret way for the U.S. to keep Canada from being competitive?
Well, there certainly is this feeling. There's a researcher based in the Lower Mainland, Vivian Krause. I think many of your listeners will have heard from her because she's been on the scene for a long time, and she studied the ways in which the competitive opportunities of Canada are being limited by foreign investors in social change. And Vivian has recently been interviewed by CBC News. I've seen her on Global. She's out there talking about her new research and ideas, and I think it's something that is resonating with a lot of people, but it's also controversial.
Well, for example, those protesters who dangled from Second Narrows Bridge, protesting the building of the pipeline, who funded those people?
Well, that's all paid for by an organization that is based in a foreign country, Greenpeace, and it has an agenda that is specifically meant to stop the economic success of Canada. So you do have to wonder, why are we interested in having people like that who don't have a stake in Canada coming to our country with, whether it's Mexico-based or Dutch-based experts in creating pandemonium, to try to steer our decision making on things that benefit the environment in Canada by protecting the land and the water, and also that let us develop socially as a country. Who are these people? And that's what Vivian has been asking. And so she's looked at the funding pathways and discovered some pretty surprising things about where the resources come from to do these campaigns.
Well, what are some of those sources?
Well, she's identified this long-term 10-year project called the Tar Sands Campaign. And by the way, there's no such thing as tar sands. That's a made-up term because tar is a manufactured product. What we call the oil sands, they call the tar sands, but it kind of gives you a hint as to the skew that they take with most everything. So she's identified this U.S.-based campaign that has got the overall goal, they say, of protecting the environment, but its efforts actually have no impact on reducing global oil use at all. They only hurt Canada.
Well, is it true the oil sands only produce as much carbon as, say, 2 or 3 large coal-fired plants in Wisconsin?
Well, that's right. I recently did a little work there. If you take the coal-fired plants that they have in the U.S., a lot of people, if you think of the oil sands, you've been listening to the propaganda that's come out of groups like the Tar Sands campaign, and you think, oh my God, that's a huge, terrible thing. Well, it's actually only 1/20th the size of the coal-fired electricity generation in the USA. Another way to put it is just as you say, Jim, I think at last count there, you would have to take just 4 individual large-sized coal-fired plants, and that would equal all the emissions from the oil sands. So very much skewed out of balance of proportion what we've seen in this assault in Canada, because those same groups that are investing tens of millions to create fear in Canada about our economic assets are not doing that in the U.S. about the things that the U.S. does. They only focus on Canada to the detriment of Canadians. And that's why I think Vivian has been concerned about this being essentially a type of protectionism.
Well, another thing that's happened, Stewart, in Seattle, they're holding protests not against pipelines, they're pro-pipelines because they don't like the danger that oil in tanker cars poses to the city of Seattle, so they'd like to see pipelines installed.
Well, that's interesting when it comes to that, because it is this very form of activism that has made it hard to develop modern pipelines. I mean, these pipelines are safe. They don't create unacceptable spill risk. They're subject to all kinds of regulation from multiple authorities. They are very costly to build because the hardware they use and install is so strong. It's just when you compare that to the risks, and I don't say this to rain on Rail's parade. I think Rail has a very good safety record, but just the sheer fact that you have moving steel on rails is intrinsically less safe than a static piece of tube that sits safely underground where it has been put. Just you can't compete with something that is stationary like that. So it's going to have a higher statistical incidence. And when we are faced with a choice, which would we like? Even the railroads would like to have more pipelines because they know that on the prairies of Canada, there are farmers who are growing frustrated with their inability to get their products onto the rails because those rails are filling up with oil cars.
Stewart, on another topic, does the Resource Works Society have a position on the proportional representation referendum taking place in BC right now by mail?
No, that doesn't really fall into what we do. I think there's interesting issues on that, and I've heard a lot of different views. Are you landing any particular place yourself, Jim?
Well, a lot of, I know people in the business industry or in industry are worried that we'll have a situation permanently that we have right now in BC where 3 members of the Green Party are controlling the government, and basically the Green Party doesn't believe anything should be built anywhere around anyone at any time.
Yeah, and I think the commitment of the Green Party to some fringe theories and ideas, and yet they're in a position of great influence and power, is quite disturbing. When you look at just recently, the Green Party is now saying, let's stop the use of Roundup in managing our forests in a very common industrial safe herbicide that is used to, in the case of silviculture, forest management, used to allow the young trees we do want that have been planted to not get crowded out by these broadleaf invasive species that, if left unchecked, would make it impossible to regrow our forests after they've been cut. So, why is the Green Party coming out to try to stop this? Is it because they want to raise the costs of forestry so we don't have a forest industry anymore? I think that might be part of it. Certainly if you look at the science, we don't want everyone, splashing Roundup all over the place all the time. But when it's used very selectively in agriculture, forest management, it is a safe, non-harmful to wildlife type of application that is used in expert hands to accomplish necessary things. And the idea that it should be banned, I put it in the same category of the anti-vaxxers and the anti-salmon farmers, those who have taken, concerns that may be legitimate but are not necessarily problems and amplified them into the sort of, almost religion intensity types of social movements where they're trying to accomplish some end. So that's where I would group in the anti-Roundup campaigns in there with the anti-vaxxers, because it's not based on science.
Stewart, anything else you wanted to bring up this week?
Well, I think as we look to the LNG story, it's going to be something that it's not just about one project. We see the wood fiber LNG project. We've also measured that in our study that's coming out on Wednesday. We're looking at the possibility of other LNG projects, like Chevron wants to build one in Kitimat. Steelhead LNG is working on a project on the west coast of Vancouver Island. This is a big, big area. And just to give you a stat, like when we do that LNG Canada project and it's done, the equivalent benefit of building that will be to remove 19 million cars from the road. It will be, just that one project will be like removing all of British Columbia's emissions, because it will allow another country like China to reduce its emissions by that amount. So it's an incredible way, and I know it's tough to see, but once you start to look into it, you realize, wow, these are big things we can do to make a big difference in the world.
Stewart, remind people again where and when your conference on LNG is.
Thanks for the chance to give it another plug, Jim. It's Wednesday, the 14th of November at 11:30 a.m. at the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel in downtown Vancouver. There's still tickets, and if you go to the resourceworks.com website, you can buy one. You can register and come on and see us tomorrow.
Stewart, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. His website, resourceworks.com. His Twitter handle, S.J. Muir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.